All right, we'll get started. So people might log on along the way, or we'll lose people. Um, I'm Brian, owner of Access to Alpine. I try and do a monthly Mountain Monday every month, and this month we're going to talk about skiing. In the past, we've done like navigation using Caltopo and stuff like that. We've done packing for Alpine adventures. We've done I don't know. But I record all of them and put them on YouTube as well. They're just free monthly conversations about some sort of mountain topic. In this case, we're talking about skiing. Also, in this case, I don't know a whole ton about skiing, which is why we got Victoria Garvin on here to actually talk about skiing. If you guys have any questions along the way, please add them to the chat and I will relay them to Victoria. But other than that, I think Vic has a plan for this month. And who is Victoria? Victoria is owner of Upward Transitions Institute, and she does guiding in the Pacific Northwest as well as in the winters guiding in the Salt Lake area. Skiing, ski mountaineering, and alpine climbing is the name of the game for her. So anything related to that, any questions related to that are fair game, including you, Jake. Ask her some tough questions. We'll see if she has the answer to them. Any things I didn't mention, Vic?
No, that's about it.
All right, the floor is yours.
Awesome. Yeah, so I'm just going to talk through just some decision making in the backcountry and mostly how reading a forecast, both avalanche forecast and weather forecast, can be applied to picking terrain to go backcountry skiing in. Um, when we're talking about safety and skiing and all of that, it can feel daunting and really tricky to find terrain that best matches the conditions. And so this is a long and complicated topic that just kind of takes some experience to get a handle of, but it's really helpful to kind of start with how do I look at the internet? How do I look at maps and different forecasting sites and start to make some decisions for myself? So these are the kind of things that I do every day for work. I am keeping up with whatever the snow is doing and whatever the weather conditions are doing, and then looking at my maps and routes and trying to find the safe skiing to be had, but also the fun skiing. So we think about safety and fun when it comes to this stuff because both matter. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here and we'll look at some of the forecasting sites first before we apply that to maps. And I use Caltopo, but there are plenty of other maps you can use. So, there we go. Awesome. Can someone give me a thumbs up that they can see my
We can
screen?
see you.
Awesome, thank you. So I'm in Utah right now, so I'm gonna start with just looking over the Utah Avalanche Center website. I also have the Northwest Avalanche Center website pulled up to scroll through as well. Wherever you are, and if you're interested in backcountry skiing, your region will have a forecasting site, hopefully. Not every region does, but the regions in the US that have good skiing typically do have good forecasting as well. Some areas like rural Alaska, you're not going to get the greatest forecast for, and you kind of have to approach all of that on your own. But here in Utah, we have the Utah Avalanche Center that covers all of the skiing that we have here in the state. Some states have multiple avalanche centers, but most have centers where you can go to the state website and then from there pick the sub region that you're in. So for me, I go to the Utah Avalanche Center and you can just look up the area that you're in. Like let's say I'm in Washington, I would look up Washington Avalanche Center, or I know from local knowledge it's called the Northwest Avalanche Center. And that also goes down into Oregon a little bit. But for Utah, the UAC will pop up. From there, I'm taken to a homepage, and there's a lot of really helpful things you can find in here. Um, and mostly the forecast is what I'm paying attention to, but there's also observations. So professionals and recreationalists are going in every day and submitting both avalanche observations and snowpack observations. And you have access to all of that, which is awesome. There's also different education and events going on all the time that are super helpful and usually free to go to. So kind of learning more about what the forecasting center does and who they are can be really great. When I come down here, I select my region. So I am mostly skiing in Salt Lake. So I just click on that. And the first thing that pops up is a little blurb about what's going on today. So this is all updated daily, and depending on where you are, you'll see a different time pop up of when the Avalanche Center is doing that. So in Colorado, in Washington, Oregon, usually it's coming out the night before. It used to be 6 p.m. I think they actually bumped it up to 4 p.m. though. So you're getting that information for the following day pretty early on. For Utah, we don't get our forecasts until 6 to 7 a.m. in the morning, which has its pros and cons. One being that like you don't get the forecast early, you can't plan based off of that forecast, but also that forecast is going to be a little bit more accurate because the forecasters have looked at everything that happened overnight and they're accounting for that. With other states that forecast earlier on, they are making assumptions about what will happen overnight. And if they're wrong, then the forecast could vary a little bit and you have to make those assumptions in the morning for yourself. So it's actually kind of neat that they do that for us here, even though we see it a little bit later. So the first thing that I see is this compass rose. And the way that the compass rose works is it's based on aspect and elevation. So elevation bands are the tiers that go upwards. And then aspect is, that north, south, east, west that you see on the sidelines. So that most outer ring here is our lower elevation band. In Utah, that's below 8,000 feet. That number also varies place to place. So you do have to look at your specific area, what they use as a qualifier. And then the mid elevation band is 8,000 to 9,500 feet, and above is 9,000, or sorry, high elevation is above 9,500 feet. So this is really important when deciding to go or deciding where to go to ski, because my forecast for right here, southeast facing mid elevation band today is actually more dangerous than my let's see, west facing mid elevation band. So that can really help inform decision making. What is the most dangerous thing that's happening in our snowpack? A lot of folks just look at that and kind of move on with their day, which is not what we want to do because that paints a small picture of what's going on in the snowpack. But we need a full story to make a decision, right? We need to know what kind of problems there are. We need to know what's happening with our weather. And so the UAC does a really good job of making a summary here in the beginning, but it's just a summary. It's not really enough. So we keep scrolling down. Got some special announcements, and then they go into a description of the weather and snow. So we talk a little bit about what's happening today in the weather and what happened yesterday. And weather is really important because it affects snowpack, but it also affects the surface of the snow. And by that, I mean, are we riding on snow that has been baked by the sun and then froze overnight? Or are we riding on snow that has fresh powder and it's cold? Because the riding experience is going to be a lot different from those two opposites. If we see that, like, for example, in our forecast, yesterday, it says, yesterday I noted melt freeze crust on solar aspects and weak faceted snow, surface snow on the northerlies. So that one sentence tells us that a melt freeze crust, frozen snow essentially, that's not fun to ski at all. So even if the solars, those south facing aspects, are safer today, they're going to be a heck of a wild time to ski. They're going to be really hard to get a grip on. It's going to be slide for life, survival skiing. And in that same sentence, we hear weak faceted surface snow on northerlies. So even though weak faceted surface snow sounds a little bit scary, we don't like the word weak and we don't like the word facets. When it's on the surface of the snow, it can actually be a lot of fun to ski. So I read that sentence and I'm hearing, okay, the north facing skiing is actually going to be quite a bit more fun today. Um, how do I weigh those pros and cons of safety and fun? That's, a bit more what we'll be talking about today. But that's a good place to start. So weather, it matters. What the sun has been doing to the snow, it matters. We want to find soft snow to ski. And if everything is freezing, maybe we want to wait until it's thawing out to ski it. So even what time do I go skiing? That's kind of a question we ask when it comes to the frozen snow. Scrolling down, we have recent avalanches. So this is also really important to read. I personally read through the avalanches every day because I'm out in the snow every day and making, pretty serious decisions about safety and where I'm going. And so I want to know everything that's happening around me. I want to know what's sliding, how big it's sliding. Is that something that is seeming really dangerous or a little bit more manageable? And by that, I mean, are we having dry, loose avalanches? Dry, loose avalanche meaning we're taking the surface of the snow and it's kind of sloughing off, which can happen naturally or by a skier. With any surface problem like that, it's a little bit more easily managed. It's not so deep that it'll fracture this whole giant snowpack that's all of a sudden falling on top of you. And that's, a very general statement. But those surface instabilities, dry, loose avalanches, wet, loose avalanches, wind slabs, those we can see a little bit better and we can manage a little bit more. So if I'm seeing that kind of activity in this recent avalanche section, I'm thinking to myself a little bit more of like, okay, maybe there's something I can do with that. If in avalanche activity, I'm seeing persistent weak layers reported, I'm seeing big slabs that are fracturing on this weak layer in the snow, maybe 2-3 feet down, that's a big red flag alarm in my mind that I don't want to be going there. I don't want to be stepping out into avalanche terrain at this time. Persistent weak layers to me are, and to most professionals and backcountry skiers, are kind of the scariest problem you can get. You can't see it. It's really highly unpredictable. And you can ski it, 14 times before it fractures. So just because there's ski tracks on it, it doesn't mean that it's stable. I was just reading an avalanche fatality that happened here a couple years ago. And it was really interesting to see the lead up of decision making that was made. And, it took parts of these uh, reports that we get and the forecast for that morning, it was high avalanche danger, just on this one aspect in elevation. And it was a persistent weak layer problem. And a whole bunch of skiers went up there and skied it a couple times and nothing happened. It was fine. It seemed stable. And then the third time that this group went up, they didn't even ski it. They were on the skin track and the whole slope fractured. And it resulted in several fatalities. And that was, it's really hard to read about. It's really hard to see those accidents happen. But you can look at the lead up to that and kind of see it coming sometimes. A lot of the times we can look at the forecasting and look at the decision making and kind of anticipate an accident like that happening. So that's why all of this is really important and why we want to do our due diligence of looking at all of these factors that go into decision making. Here we've had some recent activity in Utah. It is talking about cornice fall. It's talking about wind drifted snow and a plushy surface snow, so dry loose activity. Those are all more surface instabilities. There is this graupel layer that happened this past week that has showed a couple concerning avalanches on a weak layer, but it hasn't been too active. So that's kind of our story right now in Utah. It's like, okay, a lot of the avalanches that have been triggered in the past few days are these surface instabilities. So can we step out into avalanche terrain with that? Maybe. And then the last piece that's really important, scrolling down here, is the avalanche problems. So avalanche problem is probably the most important thing. And why they put it at the bottom, I don't really know, because this is what we should all be reading when we're going out into the backcountry and making decisions. So we have, depending on who you ask, a handful of avalanche problems, between 7 and 9. And they all act very differently. You can have a wind slab that forms, and that is caused by wind that has pushed snow onto a slope and loaded that slope. If you ski onto it, you could trigger that wind loading. We have dry loose avalanches that happen when new light snow has occurred on the surface. You know, maybe there's been a storm, a whole bunch of new snow that now doesn't stick together all that well and doesn't stick to our old snow all that well. So it's prone to sloughing off and failing. And then there's wet loose avalanches that happen when the snow heats up and then starts to slide off of the surface. We have our persistent weak layer that we mentioned, where an old and new snow interface in the snow occurs, and for some reason those two layers aren't latching onto each other very well. Maybe they're really different kinds of snow that fell on each other, or there was, you know, a rapid change in the snow going from really wet to really dry snow. Any of these really rapid changes can cause weak layers to form. And then we have this problem where if someone triggers that weak layer, it's failing pretty deep down sometimes. So that's why that's a little bit more of a scary problem. I won't go through all of the problems, but it is really important to identify what the problem is and where it is. And that can be used to kind of avoid the problem or manage it. So our number one problem today was wind drifted snow. We've had some pretty heavy winds and some snow that's been available to go over ridges and pile up in different places. So our compass rose here is telling us that this blue shading way up high here in our high elevation band, like we just talked about, that's above 9,500 feet. It is all blue, meaning we have potentially a wind slab problem on all aspects in the high elevation band. So that's something that I would think about going out today. Am I going above 9,500 feet? If so, am I going to see a wind slab? Maybe so, especially if I'm near a ridge line or a feature where the wind is pushing snow over from one place to another. My next problem is persistent weak layer. So that's scary problem. But it seems to be fairly isolated, at least in terms of what the forecasters are saying. Just on that east, southeast elevation bands, aspects on the mid to upper elevation bands. And then we also were looking at a wet snow problem today. So there were some concerns about the temperatures rising so much that it would cause the surface of the snow to heat up and then slide. So with all these problems, we manage it very differently. Like I mentioned, persistent weak layer, how I manage that typically is avoidance. I try to avoid the places where there is a weak layer because it can be highly consequential avalanches. They're hard to predict and hard to survive sometimes. Wet snow avalanches are really easy to manage. You just turn around before it gets too wet. It's a lot more straightforward. You can see it, you can feel it. When the top couple inches start to heat up, that's a good sign that you're probably out a little bit too late. And so it's something you can manage. It's something you can keep your eye on and monitor and not get yourself in a situation. And then wind slabs as well. You can pretty easily see those or probe down to tell if there's way more snow in one place than another. And a lot of times you can see this pillowing or piling up of snow, especially near ridge lines. And for wind slabs, I often just try to avoid those too. Um, Usually they're not widespread, they're not all over the mountain range. And so you can find areas where you can ski around it or enter into a ski line a different way to avoid it. The tricky thing is wind slabs can trigger above you, so you don't necessarily want to be below them either. You want to give them a little bit of a wider berth. Um,
Question on
but
wind slabs that someone had in
yeah.
the chat. It says, does a wind slab form from wind blowing onto the aspect itself, or does it form when snow is transported over a ridge and deposited onto the opposite aspect?
That's a great question. Wind slabs are formed by the transportation of snow. So typically I have my windward. So let's say this is a ridge. Maybe I'll just draw it actually. So this is my mountain. Um, oh, is my blurred screen? Oh wait, you can't see my screen, can you?
No, we can see you. We can see you too.
Oh, okay. So this is my mountain.
It is blurred though, for sure.
There we
Oh,
go.
there, it's not blurred.
This is my mountain. If my wind is coming from over here, got wind. This is my windward side. So all of the snow I have here is gonna get blown over and it's gonna pile up right here. This is my leeward side of the mountain. So when I'm thinking about wind slabs, I am thinking about the opposite side of where the wind is coming from. And there's a great way you can predict that. It's by looking at wind predictions of what direction the wind is going to be coming in from. So if I'm looking at my weather forecast and I see there's going to be a west northwest wind coming in tonight and it's going to be blowing extremely strong winds, then I can expect that that opposite side will be loaded. So the east, southeast ridge lines will be loaded. And then I can avoid those areas. I can look on my map and see if there's a nice place to go that's not there, at least at high elevations. And typically we do see wind slabs more at the high elevations because there is a place, there is a ridge line or a peak or whatever it is for snow to go up and over rather than just kind of like staying on the slope on the windward side. But it is important to note too that in most mountain ranges, it's not always as straightforward as where the wind came from and where it's going because there are these little micro swirls that happen throughout the mountains. And so sometimes even if we've had northwest winds all week, we might be surprised and find a wind slab actually on the northwest in some area because of these swirly wind patterns that just happen because of geography. So that's wind slab. Does that answer the question? Any more questions there?
Yeah, that answered her question. Another question she had, this is a tricky one. I don't know the answer.
Sorry.
Oh, no worries. I just figured she said it in the chat. Her other question was, how does grapple happen? Grapple happen / form, and does that contribute to a PWL, if at all?
This
Or
is
how
a
does it
podcast
contribute?
he's doing about safety and skiing and avalanches.
Oh, Dara, you want to mute yourself?
Oh, I thought I was muted. I'm sorry.
Okay.
No worries.
Yeah, so grapple, you can think about grapple kind of like frozen rain. It's these big chunks of, it almost looks like, just rain that's frozen. And there's like a little bit more technicality that goes into that, but it just creates these big particles that are, super weak. They're super fun to ski. And so when there is a grapple event like we had last week, it can actually make for some pretty awesome skiing. But then, it can pool in areas and create bad weak layers in certain areas. It is really light, and so sometimes it will tend to like pool in these very certain areas, and then there can be like a grapple avalanche almost. But it certainly is a recipe for a weak layer. A lot of times, especially in the Pacific Northwest, there's a lot more grapple issues there because it's this West Coast, like kind of warmer but frozen environment. And so you'll see a bunch of grapple layers in the snowpack there. Yeah, and there's a lot of different things that can contribute to a weak layer. For the most part, we're thinking about things like melt freeze crust that gets buried. So when it warms up and then freezes at night repeatedly, and then we have a storm come in on top of that, that can be a recipe for a weak layer. And all a weak layer normally is when you have two very different snow surfaces. So the old snow, whatever was there before, and then this new snow that starts piling up on top. How similar are those two surfaces? How well do they want to connect? Typical like precipitation particle, which is that nice, fancy, unique snowflake that you think of when you think about snow, that does not attach to grapple. It doesn't attach to a melt freeze crust. And so when we get storm events, those can cause problems. Facets we think about a lot cause problems. And then depth hoar we'll see at the beginning of the season. That's basically just these big crystals that form near the ground. Because the ground is pretty warm, and when it's cold outside, heat wants to transfer up, and then water vapor kind of gets trapped lower down and creates these big chunky crystals that are really weak. They're kind of like sugar. You can shake them in your hand. And then we can also see that on the surface. It's called surface hoar, and surface hoar can get buried and cause problems as well. Anything that's, different. What we want to see in the snowpack is we want to see snow, ideally, in an ideal world, consistently falling when, temperatures are stable and the snow is bonding well. And then throughout the snowpack, we're seeing snow metamorphosis going in the right direction. And the right direction is called rounding. So when a snowflake falls, it's this nice little snowflake. It's all unique. It's cute. And then it falls on the ground, and slowly it's kind of like losing an arm, getting a little muddled, and getting buried. And then as it gets buried, it's collapsing down into this round grain. And the round grain is just a ball. It's compact. It is stable. We love round grains. And as it sits there, it starts to create these little arms that reach out to other round grains. And that process is called sintering. And that is what creates a really stable snowpack. We see rounding throughout the snowpack with sintering and layers that want to stick together. But unfortunately, we live in a world where that doesn't happen all the time. We get temperature swings, we get dry spells, we get wet spells. And so really complex things start happening with our snowpack. And so that's the cool thing about a forecasting center is like, a lot of us get used to doing a lot of this forecasting on our own. We keep track of all of the weather patterns, the temperatures, the winds, and we make our own predictions in the professional world. But the cool thing is like people are paid to do that. Forecasters are paid to do that. So a lot of that information gets condensed down for free to the public on the Avalanche forecasting site. And you can go there every day and kind of see what the forecasters are thinking. And it's really good to start thinking about those things on your own because you can really make these predictions pretty easily. Was there wind above 14 miles an hour? If there's wind above 14 miles an hour, then you can make a wind slab. It doesn't take much. Is there a huge warming event today? Is it going to be sunny and 38 degrees? Cool. We're probably going to see some wet slides happening. Is there a whole bunch of new snow coming in? Maybe we'll see some dry avalanches. So these things we can think about and we can read about and confirm or deny what we're seeing. So that's everything that we see in this main forecasting page. There's sometimes really great videos that you can see of forecasters talking about the whole snowpack or an avalanche that happened or whatever it is. And those are really valuable to watch. This guy's talking about, why do east and southeast facing slopes have a layer of facets on top of an ice crust? So layer of facets, really weak snow on top of an ice crust, really hard snow. That difference, it's not going to want to stay together. So east, southeast, that's why we're seeing a persistent slab problem come up in the problems on the site right now, is because of that facet ice crust interface. So on a day like today, I want to kind of tie it into making a plan and thinking about where to go. I come back up here, I'm looking at my compass rose. Now that I have the whole story, I know that the reason why the danger is higher on the east-southeast facing slopes is because of this ice and facet mixture that's going on that's creating a persistent weak layer. So is that a manageable problem? No, I don't want to deal with it if I can go other places. I want to go, maybe north or northwest today. Because when I'm thinking about the compass rose and I'm putting my pieces together, I'm thinking about what is safe, what is fun. That's going to start to eliminate a lot of places. So already I'm thinking east, southeast, kind of off my tick list for the day. It is not the safest thing to ski. It has a persistent weak layer. I hate that word. That's why I left Colorado. I don't like dealing with persistent weak layers. And the south, the solar facing aspects, because the sun is in our southern hemisphere, the sun hits those, southeast through west facing aspects throughout the day and causes that melting of the snow and then refreezing. And what I know about that right now is that it is frozen in the morning and maybe it heats up throughout the day, but then it becomes slushy, wet snow. So cool. Now I've just eliminated east, southeast through west. So that kind of leads to limited terrain that I think will be fun for today. And let's say this is like my morning thought process for today that's going on. And this is super real. Like I did this morning before going on a ski tour. I was like, cool, that's out, that's out, that's out. What is my limited terrain for today that's going to work really well? It's going to be safe and fun. And so I limited myself mostly to this northeast through northwest terrain. And so with that, I brought up Caltopo, and this is the topographical map that I use. Caltopo has plenty of free features. There's not really a great reason to pay for it. It has slope angle shading, meaning I can see what is avalanche terrain and what is not avalanche terrain just by clicking that button. Everything that is colored is avalanche terrain. And then I have a little, let's see, I have a little legend somewhere, but I can't see it right now. Basically, yellow shading is that like high 20s. And anything above 30 degrees in terms of slope angle is considered avalanche terrain, 30 degrees or above. So the yellow shading on here, that, 28, 29 degree terrain, that's pushing it pretty close. It's pushing it pretty close to avalanche terrain. It's not avalanche terrain quite yet. There have been slides on 29-degree slopes, but I'm still more towards that safe side of things. Once it goes into the orange, I'm in the low 30s, and then red is mid 30s. So, the difference between 38 degrees and 31 degrees is not too significant to me. I know that both are in avalanche terrain. So my decision to go 30 degrees or above, either way, it means that I'm stepping into terrain that could slide. So if I'm really worried about the forecast, let's say it's persistent weak layer all around the board and I'm just not wanting to risk it, I can choose low angle terrain. I can choose a low angle ski run that I know I stand a 99.9% chance of not sliding. And so on this map, I would maybe scroll around and find a place. Oh, look, right here. This is great. I can, start up near Patsy Marley on this ridge, ski down through this area and avoid all of this avalanche terrain that's over on this left side of my screen. That looks like a really safe ski run that I could use when the avalanche hazard is high. But on a day like today, when I'm looking at north-facing terrain, I'm thinking to myself, maybe today is a good day to step out. We don't have any recent storm snow that's been causing problems. We do have a bit of a wind slab that I could be mindful of and try to avoid and move around. And my persistent weak layer is on a different aspect. And so maybe today is a good day for me to think about stepping out into avalanche terrain. So I kind of look around on this map and I'm thinking, cool, what is a north-facing aspect? And we didn't necessarily talk about this on a topographical map, so I'll do a quick overview here. But if I'm looking at a topographical map, I can determine what a slope is facing, what aspect it's facing by looking at my contour lines. So right here, I have these number indicators of what is going uphill and downhill based on elevation bands. So I see right here, this is 10,000 feet, this band right here. And it's going uphill to 10,200 feet, 10,400 feet, etc. So I know that if I'm sitting at the top of Patsy Marley and I go this way, due west, I'm going to be going downhill towards the west. So facing means if I ski it, I'm looking that direction. So right here off of the left-hand side of Patsy Marley, that's west facing because I'm going downhill in the west direction. Right here going straight up my screen, this is north facing because it's pointing towards the north. And the way CalTopo works is you can't change the orientation. It's always going to be facing north at the top, west on the left, east on the right, south on the bottom. So that's really nice for orienting yourself to slope orientation, the aspect that you're going to be traveling on. Because it doesn't move around like FatMaps, Onyx, those other maps do. So that's part of why I really like CalTopo. It keeps me really locked into what aspect I'm on. And aspect means everything in terms of safety and fun. That's a huge decision on where we go. So that's north facing. Let me find an east facing slope. This is east facing. Right off this Twin Lakes Pass. I'm going to be skiing downhill towards this lake. I'm going from, where are my elevation bands? 10,000 feet to 9,800, 9,600, etc. So that'd be my east facing terrain. And then south facing would be right here, going down towards the south, skiing towards the south. And all of those aspects behave really differently. I like generally grouping them up into my solars and polars. So solars are my south-facing terrain. It's my southeast, a little bit of east over towards the west. And that is just how the sun travels. So it's shining light, it's shining heat onto those aspects throughout the whole day. Because of that, the snowpack is dramatically different on the solar facing aspects than the polars. The polars, we call them polars because they're facing north. They're really sheltered, they're shaded, they're cold. And so it preserves this, more soft, dry snow, which has its own set of problems. But those two, broad categories, solars and polars, really behave differently. So that's a large part of my thought process when I'm going out. Are solars going to be okay to ride? A lot of times they create a melt freeze crust because the sun is shining on them. Am I gonna be hitting that crust? Is the crust getting covered? Is it going to melt out? Those are the kind of things I think about. So for today, kind of reeling it back to decision making in terms of daily forecasts. I mentioned that I wanted to stay on something northwest to, north facing. I know that that's going to be the coldest snow on my polar aspects. It's also going to be decently safe and away from that persistent weak layer that formed on ice. So let's see if I can find what we did today. Awesome. So this is Kessler Peak. It's in Big Cottonwood Canyon. And my group today, we decided, okay, snow has been acting a bit more stable this week. We've had good weather, good trends and stability. We went out and dug some snow pits, and we aren't finding any problematic results consistently. We've been keeping our eye on the forecast and the recent avalanches. All of these things led up to a pretty confident decision of, maybe today's a good day to step out on more hazardous terrain. And so we kind of looked at our options. What is facing north? Because we want to go there. And we decided on this run called God's Lawnmower on Kessler. And it goes through kind of skin track up this ridge where it's, out of avalanche terrain a little bit more. Ridges are good for skinning and being out of avalanche terrain. And then up here, and you can't really avoid being out of the avalanche terrain on this skinner. And then you drop in here and ski through this gully and out into the low angle terrain. And it is known for being a slide path, an avalanche slide path. So deciding when to ski those things is, a big deal. You don't want to ski it when there's a big avalanche problem on north facing aspects. But today we got up there and we were, pleasantly encouraged by the things we thought were true. The snow felt really stable. There were no red flags that we encountered going up. Everything was kind of lining up well, and we skied it, and it was great. And so today was a good day for that. The reason why we wanted to do it today and not tomorrow is because this huge storm is coming in tomorrow. So, I do think the storm is coming in. Wow, fun. There's going to be a lot of snow, new snow. It's probably going to be a lot more fun to ski tomorrow, honestly. But it stands a pretty good chance of sliding because that's a new snow event. So I don't necessarily want to be in avalanche terrain tomorrow if we're going to actually get this, foot and upwards of a foot that's predicted. So that is a little bit on my decision making for deciding what kind of terrain to go into and to stay away from. There's
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
You mentioned on that when you were hiking up the ridge, you didn't see any red flags. Can you just talk about what some red flags would be that you would witness and what that might look like, and when you would make a decision to turn around based on those red flags?
Totally. Yeah, so this is a great thing to talk about. So a lot of people, I teach a lot of avalanche classes, and we talk about decision making. We talk about digging snow pits and testing for stability, and making decisions based on that. And, what I always tell people is you should make your decision at home. You should make a really good decision from the comfort of your home, not when you're biased and on top of something big that you want to ski, because that's where a lot of accidents happen with highly, highly skilled people. So I'm doing all of this mental brain work at the beginning. I'm tracking the conditions. I'm thinking about, I want to ski this line, but I want to wait until the conditions are just right so that I feel really safe doing it. And so I've already been paying attention to the weather, the avalanche problems, and my stability tests in the snow. So for those of you who don't know, when we basically dig into the snow, and in the most scientific way we can, we test the snow for weak layers, for stability issues, and most importantly, we test it for propagation. So propagation meaning if we fracture a weak layer in one area, does it shoot across the test slope or the snow profile to the other side of it? If it does, that could be a good indicator that when I'm skiing it, if I fracture a part of the slope, it'll shoot across and the whole thing will slide. So that's what we're trying to avoid. I think the problem is that a lot of people will go out thinking, maybe today is a bad day to ski it, maybe it's a good day to see it, we'll just go out and see. And so you don't really want to be going out in hopes of signs for stability, but also expecting instabilities. You don't want to be going out and digging a snow pit and making a decision just on that snow pit. But with that said, we do like to gather information when we go outside. We're always gathering information. And we hope that everything is confirming what we already think. We hope that we go out and we don't encounter these like red flags. But if we do, if we even see one red flag, that's a good sign to turn around. We don't need 5 red flags to turn around. So the red flags that I look for are, I go out and I'm skinning up, and as I'm skinning up, I hear this collapsing in the snow. Cool. That's like a yellow flag. Snow can collapse and be okay. But it's starting to alert me that like some layer in the snow is crushing down, is collapsing. And I get more concerned when I see like shooting cracks through the snow that I'm traveling on. So the shooting cracks especially can be like a big red flag. And a lot of times people will ask me like, oh, is this like little crack in the skin track a crack that I should be worried about? And it's like, no, that's just like from our skis. Usually it'll be adjacent to you. It'll be a pretty obvious crack running through new snow that you haven't touched. It'll start where you are and then shoot across, either 2 feet or, 10 feet, whatever it is. So those kind of things, I'm like, okay, whoa, that could be a sign of a weak layer, and I don't really want to go into avalanche terrain. Because a lot of the times when we're skinning up, we're trying to skin through non-avalanche terrain, and so a collapse and a crack that don't avalanche, if you took that same scenario and put it in 30+ degree terrain, it maybe would avalanche. So we try to pick up on those things while we're still in non-avalanche terrain. Another yellow flag, red flag that I look for is when I'm putting in a skin track, when I'm making my up track, and I'm making switchbacks or even just, soft turns. Am I kicking off debris as I'm making the skin track? So especially wind slabs, sometimes you'll make a sharp turn, you'll make a switchback in the trail, and you'll slough off this small slab. And maybe the slab is the 2 inches that you penetrated down in the trail. But that 2-inch wind slab can turn into a 6-inch wind slab really fast. And a 6-inch wind slab can do some damage. Especially if you're in, cliffy terrain that you could get swept over. So I'm paying attention a lot to when I start making switchbacks. That tells me a lot. It tells me about most surface instabilities. So wind slab, dry loose, wet loose. Am I sloughing anything off when I'm skinning? If you are, that's not a great sign. That's when you should start to have some questions on if you should continue to go up. Other red flags, let's say, I really like to bring up this example from a route I did last year. It's a 50 classic called Cold Fusion on Mount Timpanogos. And the forecast for the day, so the decision making leading up to this day was, I was new to the area. I hadn't really been tracking it. But I had some friends that lived in the area, and so I came in, and the avalanche forecast was green light. It was, low danger across the board, all aspects and elevations. And the forecaster said, like, literally green light, go for big objectives. And so we decided to do it, but I noticed some wind in the forecast and I was a little bit worried because it's a big peak. Forecasters don't make it all the way out there. It's a huge approach. And so my mind was thinking, yeah, maybe this is a good day for it, but maybe we'll encounter some wind issues too. But the only way to know is to go out there. And so we started going up the ridge, and about halfway up, when we were making switchbacks, we started kicking off wind slab debris that was small, but I was starting to think like, wow, if we have, a little wind slab right here, when we go another 1,500 feet up the slope, what is the wind slab going to be doing? So we go up a little bit more, and I was like, let's just dig a snow pit. Let's look at stability. And we dug a snow pit and we saw a little bit of propagation that was concerning. And so at that point it was like, we thought it was going to be green light, but we started to see these red flags and it ended up that we had to turn around. But those little things add up and all kind of come together. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you for answering that question.
Yeah. Kind of a long answer. There's so much to like red flags that we look for because all of these little things, it's never like, it's usually not one big thing. It's usually not like, oh, I saw an avalanche over there, probably we should turn around. It's like getting a feel for the snow and these little hints everywhere. But yeah, this is just like kind of, there's only so much we can talk about in an hour, and so much like years and years of experience go into decision making. And my advice for people is like, start small, start in non-consequential terrain and very, very, very slowly work up to whatever it is that your goal is, because this kind of stuff takes a really long time to get a feel of. So learn from others, learn from experienced people, play around in areas that you have some leeway, you have some wiggle room. Don't start off with God's lawnmower. Awesome. Are there any other questions? All this, I'm gonna stop sharing my screen.
I have some questions, less related to a specific plan, but more direction for people going off of this video chat. Like, what are some things you mentioned? Don't start with God's lawnmower. What are some things, not objective wise, but what are some things that you think people should do to set themselves up for success getting into the backcountry initially? Like courses or I don't know, just any.
Oh, totally. I think a great way to start is by taking an avalanche course, because there's so much. That's like 3 days of, a lot of what I talked about today. And that's, 3 days that are dedicated to like, let's talk about this for 8 hours a day and like really hone it in and look at the terrain. So it's a great way to get started and at least know what's avalanche terrain and what to avoid when you're getting started. Because the mountains are a really harsh learning environment, meaning if you make a mistake, sometimes it can be a fatal mistake. And so we want to at least know how to make mistakes in non-fatal environments, environments where we can not get buried, where we can ski out, all of that.
That's awesome. Anyone else have any questions for Victoria? Thank you for taking an hour and chatting about all this stuff with us. Can we follow you on Instagram? What's your Instagram?
Totally. What is my Instagram? My company is called Upward Transitions Institute, and it is at Upward Transitions Institute. And then yeah, that's the one I know.
Nice. We'll give you a follow there. Thanks again.
Yeah.
And thanks for everyone that joined.
Yeah, thanks for everyone that joined. And
There's some kind words in the chat for you, Victoria, from Kelly and Caroline.
Awesome.
And from Dara. Thank you.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.